Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm just going to give it a couple of moments to let other people filter in. Just let people come in. You know, it's still lunchtime, so they're grabbing a cup of tea and sitting down. So in just a minute, we'll be starting. I'll be introducing our guest speaker today.
Hi, everyone.
Yes, we do love chat box participation, so feel free to drop us a hi and where you're from just whilst we're waiting just for the next minute.
Hi, Elisa.
So for those who have arrived already, this session will be recorded and we will be sending out the recording afterwards. So if you found value and you've enjoyed this session, feel free to share amongst your teams, colleagues, and people who you think will find this interesting, which no doubt you will. Hi, Jade. Welcome. Okay, I'm going to get started with the intro. And then we're going to hand over to today's guest. So welcome everyone to our April People guest session with Simon Drinkwater. Today's session will be recorded and that will all be sent out afterwards in the post-session email. But before we get started, I want to quickly mention our annual wellbeing plan at Beam. It's 12 months of wellbeing sessions designed to create lasting impact, not just a one-off moment of awareness. We help organizations support their people consistently across the year with practical sessions that build understanding, tools, and healthier habits over time. It's a fixed price plan too, so you will be able to invite an unlimited amount of people at your organization. If you would like to find out more, then I will put a link to book a call with me, just a quick 30 minutes, and we can have a deeper chat about that. Or you can drop us an email at office@beamtraining.co.uk. I'll put both of those links and details in the chat in just a moment. So today we are joined by Simon Drinkwater, the founder of Vantor Advisory. And Simon brings over 28 years of strategic experience and works with SME leaders who are navigating the pressure to modernize, adapt, and think differently about the future of work. He describes his role as being a trusted conscience for leaders, helping organizations take what he calls the strategic pause before rushing into any change or transformation. Now, I'm going to hand over to Simon to get started with today's session, the AI Capacity Conundrum. Welcome, Simon.
Welcome, Tom, Leanne, everybody. Thank you for having me. Let me just quickly share my screen and then I'll get through that and then we can move on. So, all being good. Somebody please just tell me, Tom, that all good?
Good. All good,
excellent.
Yes. Yeah, we can see that.
Cool. Okay, so look, firstly, I guess thank you, Leanne, Tom, and the People Network for having me today, and thank you for all of you who have taken some time to dial in. So I'm going to talk to you about something I guess I've termed the AI Capacity Conundrum, and why AI is increasing output but not always easing pressure. And there'll be plenty of time, I'm sure, for questions at the end, but feel free to put them in the chat, and I think Tom will keep an eye on those as we go. So, but before we dive in, I just want to elaborate a little bit more about, I guess, the mission and purpose behind Vantor Advisory. Tom's touched upon it, but it's key really as to why I talk on topics such as this today. So I guess most leaders today feel pressure to move faster than they're comfortable with. And that's down to AI, automation, structural change. And it's coming from every direction. And so the terrain is unfamiliar and the cost of getting it wrong is high. And in the army, when there's the terrain's uncertain, you don't tend to send everybody charging forward. You send out a scout, and the scout moves ahead of the main force. They gain sort of the altitude, they scan the ground. They identify risks, obstacles, viable routes before decisions are locked in. And that's really the role of Vantor Advisory. and that the role we play for leadership teams. So our name comes from Vantage and Mentor, and it reflects exactly this role. It's standing on that ridgeline, seeing what's coming and guiding leaders through complexity with clarity and confidence. So our mission is not to push technology, frameworks or solutions as such. It is to act as that trusted conscience, as Tom said, upstream of decisions that affect people, culture, structure and leadership capacity. And we treat AI decisions very much as leadership decisions because the real impact is felt first in trust, accountability, roles and resilience, not necessarily systems. And I guess what makes us different is that we help leaders pause long enough to see clearly, to align before accelerating, and to avoid layering innovation on top of potential dysfunction within an organization. So we don't march you forward, we help you understand the ground you're about to step onto, and Vantor Advisory exists to help leaders move forward with confidence. So hopefully that helps. But as I said, that's just wanted to mention that really to set the scene, really, because what I'm going to talk to you about is very much that. It's trying to look forward and perhaps raise the sorts of questions that people and businesses need to think about. So with that in mind, if you've heard me talk before or you've seen any stuff that I've written in the past, you'll hear me, you'll have heard this viewpoint of mine. And it's that the majority of leaders are talking about AI, but it's moving faster than any previous wave of change. And there's this sense that if you don't jump in now, you'll be left behind. But the question I keep coming back to is really, are we running the right race? And do we really understand what we're getting into? Do we really understand what the impact on the worker is or the workforce will really be? And are we thinking about that now or we have to react later? Because in the rush to do AI, many organizations, I feel, are sprinting when what's really needed is a marathon plan, and one that paces people, allows organizations to take a moment to reflect on what they're about and want to be, and that gives time to adapting working practices, building endurance, developing confidence, and not just capability. So fast adoption does not equal long-term readiness in my eyes, and what will still be around throughout will be people. And what is that people provide besides skill, knowledge and behavior, of course, it is capacity. It's the capacity to get things done. So as we run our own individual and organizational marathons, we will need to be very conscious about what is happening to the capacity of our people and our whole organization as we start to layer in AI. So if we look at this from I guess the other perspective, today is about a pattern many of us are living, and I believe will become a greater challenge for many organizations and leaders, but that some may be slow to recognize or maybe struggling to describe. AI is increasing output. Things are faster. First drafts appear instantly. Summaries take seconds. And we're also taken down avenues that may not have been our intention when we wrote that first prompt. Or, when you read that sort of, would you like me to now do X, Y, or Z? And then you follow the prompt that's been suggested. And before long, you've definitely gone miles away from where you started. And yet for many organizations, we hear that the pressure hasn't eased. In some cases, as AI starts to layer in, it's intensifying. And the name, I guess, that I and Vantor Advisory have given this is that tension is the AI Capacity Conundrum. And I want to reframe this from the outset, because this is not primarily a technology conversation, as I said. It's a workforce planning and organizational design conversation, and it's a leadership and HR conversation. So for larger organization, this leans into strategic workforce planning conversations also. What do we need today versus what do we need tomorrow? And how might that evolve as AI is further embedded into our ways of working? So let's start with, I guess, the lived experience. Leaders are being told to adopt AI while most likely already running pretty lean. We've all been reading that AI will increase efficiency and we can get more done, and we would therefore expect pressure to drop. The real headlines state that people will lose their jobs because AI will make things that much more efficient. So that efficiency gain is being used against workers, tension rises. And leaders are being asked for speed and certainty in a world offering neither. And customer expectations are quietly resetting. And you're seeing this particularly in the legal sector and professional services sector, where clients are now realizing that they don't necessarily need to pay the same day rate they used to because work is getting done quicker. We're seeing faster responses, higher quality, more personalization, while teams are already stretched. So the question really for me then isn't, is AI useful? The question is, why isn't speed translating into a felt capacity in the workplace? And that tension is the signal we should pay attention to, because it tells us, it's in my eyes, that the bottleneck isn't the tool, it's not the technology. And it's no exaggeration to say we're living in the most accelerated era of technological change many of us probably will ever see. You know, even the surveys by the likes of McKinsey at the back end of 2025, where they found 80% of organizations already using Gen AI. Well, that will be up higher than that now, probably nearer to 90%, but only a couple of years ago it was down as low as 55. And the AI market is projected to reach $1 trillion by 2031. So we're all in this sort of race, if you like. People, process, and culture lag, and I might argue more widely that organizational design, systems, data also are not equipped for the AI era. And these are the areas that gain greater focus by leaders and certainly are becoming more the topic of conversation. But the paradox is this, in my eyes: our technology is accelerating faster than our human systems. You can see technology on that blue line, people on the orange line. So that's the skills, culture, governance from a people's perspective. So what this means in terms of workforce capacity is the question. Is it helping create more capacity, or is our slowness to adapt actually having the opposite effect and widening a gap that we can't accommodate? And that's sort of what that white line is just trying to sort of signify. And that's how you end up that half a track behind, in terms of my marathon analogy, before you've even started. It's where the trap appears next, because when everything feels urgent, speed can start to look like progress, even when it isn't. So my chart is nothing more than representative, by the way. I made it up. It's not a real one, but it's really there to demonstrate a point of that growing gap, because tech can be advanced far quicker than people will evolve or transition to it. So one question is how or whether we can close it, that gap. And if we can't, how do we at least do our best to reduce it and increase human capacity by adopting the tech as best we can? So a moment ago, I asked, I sort of said, we're faster, so why does it still feel harder? This is the heart of the AI capacity conundrum, really. If we ignore for a moment the front end of AI evolution, the high end of the curve I showed, and focus lower down that curve towards where employees meet the technology, and technology being the likes of Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, etc. AI is absolutely compressing tasks and speeding up output. But the organization doesn't automatically get that time back as usable capacity. The issue isn't that people lack time, and it's definitely not that they're unmotivated. It's the way work is shaped, the handoffs, the approvals, maybe unclear ownership, incentives and demand that expands to fill any productivity gain. And it still assumes the old operating model of an organization, or people have yet to truly understand how to leverage AI in how they work rather than what they do. And I suggest that AI is or will expose organizational design problems at some point, because AI doesn't automatically solve them. So the gains will show up more as throughput rather than more breathing room. And that's why, even as tools get adopted and usage climbs, the lived experience doesn't improve necessarily. And that gap I showed with the white line doesn't necessarily get any smaller, which sets up the next point around adoption is rising, but maybe relief is not. So this pressure, I guess, in my eyes, isn't imagined, and certainly in conversations I have is not imagined. AI adoption is accelerating. SMEs in particular are being pulled into it, whether they feel ready or not. Larger organizations are on their own journeys too. And the adoption curve matters because it increases the ambient expectation. If output is easier to generate, the organization starts to behave as if capacity has already increased, even when it hasn't. And whilst thinking about all of this, remember that each individual will be on their own specific journey. So your organization isn't all moving in sync. And therein lies one of the biggest challenges. Worse, there are people in your organization who are slowly feeling ever more stressed and under pressure, and a very real well-being problem waiting to happen. And that well-being certainly needs consideration. It's not something I'm addressing today, but there is certainly very much a topic of conversation for me as AI and technology really lays into an organization. What's that well-being impact as people have to use this new technology? But this is what acceleration feels like, I guess, inside organization. It's not always excitement, although I will obviously admit I am a huge enthusiast for AI. So it's not always excitement, but potentially friction. And that's something that needs to be watched out for. So my focus, I guess, is raising awareness among organizations so that they consciously think about their AI adoption, as the outcome of AI landing will be less forgiving for those that don't do it well. I've led or supported large transformation programs in my past, and I guess one lesson always comes through that you can't deliver change off the side of someone's desk. You have to understand the capacity constraints or implications of whatever that change is going to be if you're going to do it well. And in one program, we expanded our team temporarily as we pivoted a business from a life and pensions business to a wealth management business. It took well over 2 years, and for a significant part of that journey, we significantly increased the size of the HR and change management team. So why did we do that? Well, it was to create that bandwidth to lead and communicate the change and to learn the lessons as we went, much the same as is required with AI adoption today. So the result was faster adoption, less burnout for those involved. More importantly, it meant we did things properly. We communicated, we engaged, we had capacity to do what was needed to be done. And therein lies an important relationship between capability and capacity. But I recognize equally that many SMEs, for example, don't have the resources that create extra capacity, whereas very large organizations often can free people up, probably because people weren't operating at full capacity in the first place. But it's okay if you don't have resource. There is support out there, and there is no such thing as perfection in this new AI-led period of change. Ironically, part of the solution for creating that capacity is arguably AI tools themselves, and they're part of the, I guess, the predicament we find ourselves. And look, and there's been plenty of research in the past, and MDPI are known for one piece where, it sort of talks about organizational capacity for change. It's research on organizational capacity for change confirms that capacity, which is the resources, energy, and attention you allocate, is a distinct predictor of transformation success. So when we talk about agility in this AI era, for example, we need to be clear, agility is about capability and capacity. So what we certainly can't do here, and here's probably the most common failure mode, is treating AI like a bolt-on or a new fancy tool. And there are plenty of examples that I've come across, and I'm sure maybe some of you guys have as well, where companies have just chucked AI in and just started using it. Most organizations start with tools and basic AI literacy training. However, AI literacy is defined. It's useful, but in my eyes, it's incomplete. Because the real question isn't necessarily which AI should we use, it's what needs to change in the way work is organized so AI doesn't quietly make things worse. And what do we mean by the way work is organized? Well, when I guess AI is bolted on to existing workflows, the pattern is strikingly consistent. And so there's plenty of articles and analysis of this. Extra checking, rewriting, reformatting, more outputs, more noise, more alignment time, inconsistent quality, and creeping trust issues. So, new risks potentially with no clear ownership. And this is the crux, in a way, if that happens, is you don't get time back. You just get faster at producing volume, and volume isn't the goal, of course. Outcome is always the goal. So when leaders say we have no capacity, I guess they're usually pointing at, for me, maybe one or more of three concrete constraints. People are maxed out, finite energy, constant context switching, little slack. They've got too much is in flight. There's too many initiatives diluting focus from outcomes that matter, and poor prioritization. Or potentially there's structural friction. There's inefficiencies from inconsistent direction or misalignment from the top of the organization. Maybe there are weak processes, poor systems, and data, and uneven capability. And it's explicit, okay? This is not, I think I said it earlier, is not a motivation problem. It's rarely a headcount problem, but it's therefore a leadership and a design problem that needs to be addressed. And we're getting to the heart of an organization, yeah, its culture and its operating model. So this is where I guess Vantor Advisory stance becomes very direct. Organizations don't fail from a lack of hard work. They may not fail either from a lack of ambition. They want to get on board the AI bandwagon, understandably so. They fail from a lack of leadership accuracy and a clear approach to AI adoption. They rush into it, whereas I would always advise taking a strategic pause. And why is that? Well, it's because there are often misalignments that sit under capacity pressure. There's management capability and courage, difficulty prioritizing decisively under pressure, and then managing the ensuing change. There's ambition versus reality. Goals being set without a true understanding of what AI can actually do and how much time it actually now takes to complete a task. And then there's constraints and delivery effort. There's leaders risk underestimating time, being self-aware, what is their judgment versus that proposed by the AI, coordination of activities across their team, and the actual capability needed to deliver what they expect. And a further consequence of not focusing on the importance of capacity to assist with AI adoption and capability is what I refer to as the depth problem. So if we look at what I mean by this, and I should point out, I don't really think I'm probably sharing stuff that many of you guys won't already be aware. But we're talking about skills gap or skills lag, where employees are still uncertain how AI fits their role or their career. They aren't sure what they can use, what they can do with it, and whether doing something is a good or a bad thing. And that's why I mentioned a little bit earlier, AI literacy depends how you define it. Talk about trust gaps and trust lags, where people fear replacement more than augmentation. If they do not know what is going on or why their employer is doing what they are doing with AI, then the distrust widens, and this in turn then risks damaging culture. And all because the company did not understand what the capacity conundrum was about and create capacity to help with adoption, let alone have an idea what to do with the extra capacity created once AI had been adopted. And finally, governance lags. Okay, nobody's quite sure who's accountable if AI gets it wrong. Nobody wants to do it. If something goes wrong. Nobody knows what to do if something goes wrong. And people like clarity where there is often none. So we risk unclear ethical boundaries being crossed and unclear ownership. And if things go wrong, then that is yet more work taking up yet more capacity. So again, I said it's not a technology problem, it's a people and a process problem. And that's why the depth matters. So because you can't build trust, capability or culture on shallow foundations. The question then becomes, and there's a lot of questions you'll gather through this, is, how do you build for stamina whilst everyone else is still sprinting? How do you account for the capacity needed to embed change? And hopefully what do you do with the additional capacity that AI creates? So here's the reframe I mentioned at the outset, okay? AI adoption is not an IT tool project. And it's why you often hear this conversation now about who's leading. Is it HR? Is it IT? Etc. It's an organizational redesign challenge, and everybody needs to be part of that. We introduce a powerful capability into a system and everything shifts. How work flows, where decisions sit, what managers are accountable for, how quality is protected, what skills are required, when, how quickly, and how trust is built or eroded. And this is why, while a lot of organizations, gather use cases, and that can ultimately stall. It's the right thing to do, but you also have to recognize you'll get a level of energy and motivation from that because people can see some quick wins, but potentially there is a risk of limited progress if the next and subsequent actions aren't managed carefully. Moreover, what you're also starting to challenge is your organization's future culture. What type of organization do we need to be to harness AI to achieve the goals we set? Faster, quicker, cheaper, without sacrificing quality or service. And where effective and scaled impact happens, leaders will notice very specific shifts. Operational performance and workflow reliability improve, higher quality delivered faster with less rework, better outcomes. And the most telling aspect of all of this is perhaps emotional, not technical. Leaders will start to describe a different feeling, greater control, confidence, less anxiety. And in the AI era, we need leaders to take on more accountability and ownership as they use AI to achieve better outcomes. And that's the target state, okay? It's not more AI use, but more reliability and control in how work gets done. So let's think a little more about what this means in terms of 3 shifts in leadership. So the first one is a move from use cases to workflows. Capacity is rarely created by sprinkling AI across tasks, okay? It's created when leadership choose end-to-end workflows and make work more visible, and decide where AI genuinely can help and where human judgment must remain central, and defining quality standards and validation clearly. The skill here, of course, is how to think. So rather than where can we use AI, ask what repeats every week when rework happens, where decisions slow due to missing information and where outputs are produced that no one truly uses. And when I talk about what is happening in the AI era, a few other things, I guess, spring to my mind. One is, this is an opportunity for an organization to take a step back and self-reflect. It's probably been running at 100 miles an hour for a long period of time. So, slow yourself down and make sure you understand where your organization is at and where it's going. It's an opportunity for leadership equally to ask themselves, do we really understand how all parts of our business work? And we need to know that, because if we're going to stick AI in there, we need to understand where and why. Do we understand what workflows are happening, what our processes at all levels look like? And then the last one really is, if the answer is no, then proceed with AI with extreme caution. Otherwise, you risk a lot of effort, time, and potentially cost for perhaps not as good a return on investment. In shift 2, I guess the leadership shift 2 is managers needing clarity, permission, and accountability. Managers aren't generally resistant. Everyone wants to do a good job, and if they can do it more efficiently or effectively, of course they want to know more. However, they are cautious, and often for good reason, and particularly in certain cultures. And in the case of AI adoption, fear can stem from a lack of understanding, anxiety about data exposure, and unclear accountability if something goes wrong. So leaders must make expectations explicit. What's acceptable to draft with AI? What must never be shared with public tools? How accuracy is validated? How tone and ethics and customer trust are protected? And who is accountable when AI is involved? And there's a key phrase, really, which is, this isn't policy theatre, okay? It's leadership behaviour. It is where you read a lot about the importance of governance, guardrails, AI policy, and risk management. But ultimately, that's all leadership at its heart. And then shift 3 is the one I think leaders potentially risk underestimating, and it's trust. AI sits on this fault line, really, where productivity versus confidence. And the risk is often in the narrative. If the dominant message becomes do more with less, compliance may rise, but discretionary effort falls. And the alternative message is stronger and more human. AI should enhance human capability, enable better judgment and quality, and become a strategic advantage and not a threat. And if I certainly believe that if leaders don't narrate intent, people fill that silence with external narratives like jobs are at risk or AI takes jobs, etc. Trust doesn't collapse loudly. It generally erodes quietly through probably ambiguity, lack of clarity, and that clearly will create a bigger organizational issue down the road. So the early warning signs, I guess, around this whole sort of capacity conundrum for me really are quite subtle. Inconsistent AI usage across departments, growing skepticism maybe about what AI means for roles and futures, particularly if we start thinking we're sort of making ourselves, I guess, our roles less fulfilling as AI takes on aspects of those roles, and silence from the top, leaving people to fill the gap themselves. So these signs, I guess, matter because they signal drift. And when drift becomes normal, leaders wake up later to a trust problem they didn't realize they were creating. So if you wait for loud resistance, you've waited too long. So it's important to recognize that AI adoption is at its heart a change management challenge. And much of the AI capacity conundrum can be addressed early in the journey, in my eyes. As I mentioned right at the outset, I explain how AI adoption is a marathon and not a sprint. It's a long-term evolving journey, not a quick fix. And a lot of this is therefore mindset. The compounding risk if organizations keep experimenting without considering structural change is potentially key. Yes, there is nothing wrong with pilots and trials, and I'm a huge advocate for them, but be aware of potential consequences as you embed AI further into your organization. You may well see some small improvements in capacity, people getting stuff done a little quicker than they once did. And it may take time, but there could well be an inflection point when you have to make tough people decisions, because the accumulation of all these small improvements creates other sort of organizational challenges and maybe even opportunities. But because it's happened by stealth, the risk is that leadership credibility erodes and trust weakens, and future resilience is undermined and capacity problems calcify. So you have just created new norms as you've been putting AI in, and that mustn't be missed. And once those norms are in, people don't want to change. So again, it's something you have to really keep your finger on the pulse for. So the goal isn't necessarily to use more AI. It's to lead your organization through an AI change journey in a way that creates real felt capacity, strengthens trust, and builds long-term resilience and growth. And the earlier you get on that journey, the easier it will be to go at a pace that you can accommodate, as opposed to playing catch up with competitors or trying to keep up with the rate of technological change. And as I sort of said earlier, really, my mission at Vantor Advisory is to raise awareness of the potential challenges that lie ahead. And that is our strategic vantage. And that is why, I really enjoy having the opportunity to present on sessions like this. We aim to keep leaders honest, whilst also supported, and leadership and judgment first, organizational readiness, people, culture and capability, change and resilience, and then technology and data. So there's all these aspects, if you like, that need consideration, which can make it all quite complicated. But as I said, the sooner you sort of start to sit down and reflect on some of this stuff, you can put a more meaningful plan in place. So as I come towards the end, I guess I just sort of put a few questions out there for people to walk away with. Because as I said, really, I sort of see part of my role really is to, hopefully help people slow down enough to make the right decisions and make the second and third order consequences more visible. So a few example questions, I guess, for you. First one, are you clear what the capacity conundrum is in your organization? Do you really understand workflows and how things are getting done? Where is AI currently adding noise rather than creating real felt capacity, assuming you've already implemented it? Maybe you haven't. So in which case you've got a perfect opportunity to set off on the right foot. Which workflow, if redesigned, would free the most time and reduce the most friction? And do your managers or employees have clear boundaries and the confidence to lead responsible AI use? So slightly longer than the ones on the screen, but just sort of bolster those out a little bit. So again, there's some things to just reflect on. Plenty of other questions I asked throughout the session, but those are some sort of key ones at the end. And I'm just going to close therefore with, I guess, the Vantor Advisory stance, really. Vantor Advisory is not here to help organizations simply do things faster. We help leaders decide what is wise to do at all, and we act as a strategic vantage point and protective presence before irreversible choices are made. So the message of the session, I guess, ultimately is relatively simple. AI can increase output, but unless leaders redesign how work actually gets done, strengthening leadership capability and protecting trust alongside adoption, you don't build sustainable extra capacity. In fact, the pace of technological change simply makes the capacity gap larger. So that's the end, I guess, of my sort of chat to you all around that AI capacity conundrum. I just have one little last slide, if it's a bit of a shameful plug, if you don't mind. But it really is, the reason I'm doing it, sort of put this out here, is because it really pulls together a lot of the stuff I've talked about. I fully recognize that business leaders are very time pressured. Yeah, you're trying to run a business, you're trying to run teams, you've got a lot of day-to-day stuff going on. And if anything, lack capacity more than most. And therefore, trying to work out how do you build an AI adoption plan is therefore probably another thing on the to-do list. And if you know of anybody in your organization that would love to be part of a small group of peers learning how to sort of build that plan and move forward, then this offer, the program I'm in the process of completing is there, is on the screen for you there. It's not a training program. It's built around Vantor Advisory's FutureFit AI Readiness framework. It's a collaborative and supportive community who can share learnings as they go on their own journey. If this feels something maybe of interest to you, your leadership team, or any members of it, please reach out to me separately, and I can discuss with you if it's the right fit for where you're at right now. Other than that, Tom, Leanne, everybody, I wish you well on your AI journey, is what it leaves me to say.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Simon. If anybody has any questions, pop them in the chat just whilst we continue to talk with Simon just now. And we'll just keep the session open just for a few more minutes. So thank you, Simon. What we'll do is we'll send out the AI Future Fit workshop details to everybody that is registered as well. So, just in case you didn't have time to jot down all of those details, we'll be sending out how to contact Simon and Vantor Advisory as well. So just...
Sorry, I pulled that off the screen rather quick, didn't I?
No, that's fine. We'll email it off to everyone, so that's totally fine. I think I think everybody has so many questions, whether they share or not, about how AI is implemented in business. And I think right now, at this stage, no one can be really as a business owner, especially when you're not in the world of AI, it's quite difficult to know where to start. And we've seen clients from the just give out ChatGPT licenses and tell people to just freely use it to speed up their work. And I'm sure that will have consequences along the line. But one of your slides, and I think it was adoption versus readiness. And I know you said that it was sort of a made-up graph just to sort of give perspective.
Yeah.
But I did notice one marker, and it said that there was like a prediction of AI sort of readiness being around about 2027. Do you think it's going to take us that long to get ready?
Well, I think it's an individual journey, is the reality. Yeah, some organisations, I would suggest, have done a lot of work already, and they've got their head around what AI is and what it means for their organisation and how they can take it on board. Some are just finding their way as they go. Some haven't started. So I see it very much as an individual situation, really. It's not a, I mean, I said it was sort of a slide deck I put more to emphasize, I guess, the gap between the pace of technological change and AI evolution and versus human, I guess, adoption of it. So look, I guess I really started digging into this much more deeply about 12, 14 months ago. And if I think about the journey that it's taken, what I've seen happen in that period of time, then look, I think, yes, absolutely. I think in 27 we'll still see some people still probably trying to get their head around it. Hopefully not too many. Hopefully most people would have started some kind of journey by then. But look, it's like any technology, isn't it? People have a fear for it. They're not sure where to start, as you said. Time will tell, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of interesting stories and documentaries that are coming out about the sort of AI implementation at work. And there was one that we recently watched with Dr. Hannah Fry, and they were talking about the medical industry and how they're using the AI implementation within their workflow, which is something that you spoke about. But then it has resulted negatively in those like denials of insurance claims. And I know the health system in America works very differently to here in the UK, but it was just very interesting to see how that is being used. And people are companies are already seeing how it's causing a bit more of an issue.
I think we're seeing that everywhere in a lot of places. I certainly come across it. It's there is still so much to learn. There's still so many unknowns, I think, around AI and what it can do, can't do, the risks. etc. I mean, I think we can all get our heads around, some of the potential for it. But when you start using it, and it's only really when you start using something or doing something do you start to come across your obstacles. And it's sort of partly why, again, I come back to that sort of analogy I've used around a marathon plan, because I'll always say, you could set off on a quick 20, 100-meter sprint without any preparation. You may not go very fast, but you'll get there. You get it done. You'd never set off on a marathon unless you perhaps done some research, looked at nutrition, spoken to others who have done it, plan for eventualities. Things are going to go wrong during the event. It's as much physical as mental. There's so many more sort of permutations for it. And I think this is just what we're starting to find, is that only as people are getting down the journey on their own personal adoption journey, issues are popping up, challenges are popping up. And again, all I'm trying to do really is trying to get ahead and try and bring it back so that people don't make quite so many errors or make so many mistakes on the way through.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your insight. It's really interesting, I think, because we all don't know enough about the change that's happening, and especially if we're in a large organization as well. It's such a huge thing to implement into everyday use. So thank you very much for sharing your insight. We will share your details and share the record. Oh, Leanne's got a question.
There's a lovely comment from Lisa in the chat box, which I just thought, because it's how I feel sort of from a neuroscience and a psychology point of view. So Elisa says that her organization is big and they are allowed to use AI, it's fine. But on a personal perspective, finds that using AI, even for writing emails, can limit our brain and imagination capacity. I could bang on for hours about that, so I won't from the psychology side of it. But
but it also leans into what I mentioned at one point. I talked about how we work versus what we do. And I can sort of talk about my own journey of using AI, and how I use it today is very different to how I used it 12 months ago. And what I mean by that, so when Alyssa talks about, it limits our brain and imagination capacity, I tend to, I'll simplify this, right? So if I know I've got something to do, maybe it's writing a presentation, maybe it's writing a report, maybe it's whatever it be, I tend now to go for a long walk, because I get the brain working first and I start thinking about what it is that I'm going to need to do. And I actually now record that as I walk. So I then end up with a transcript of my thoughts, which I chuck into the AI. But the other thing I've also done on the route is I've thought the types of information I'm going to need to put into that AI. So I end up creating like these mini projects within AI. So I help it come up with the ultimate prompt. It's like, so the ultimate prompt is going to now use my thoughts. It's going to use maybe some research I've done and other context documents. So I think there is a risk for what I might call the lazy user, that it starts to take over. You sort of dumb down your brain and your imagination. But if we change how we work, I actually suggest it actually can enhance it, because it actually helps me think about other stuff I never thought of. So it's a really great point that Elisa makes.
The tool is never the problem, it's the user, whatever it is, right?
Always.
And we can see it. I mean, if you go on LinkedIn, all of us are astute enough now that it's just glaringly obvious when someone's just posted, copied and pasted something from ChatGPT. And I'm anyone I've ever spoken to now is just, as soon as I read the first line and I see it's just AI, I'm out. It just completely disengages my interest. So there's clearly still, and there's evolutionary reasons for it, but there's clearly still this drive that we want human contact. I want to know your ideas, not the ideas that AI has told you to have.
But the other thing is, and this is a better guess, and I wrestle with this one, because I might have my ideas, but I ask AI to help me write it, because I think, candidly, sometimes AI writes it better than I do, And again, it depends how you set the AI up as well. So I think, we've all got this really interesting relationship building with it, you know, I agree with you. You know, the last thing you want to read is something that you can tell has been spurned out, and you have no idea if the person thought of it or not. But do I use AI to help me write some stuff? Yeah, I do. But I do the thinking first. And I
Yeah,
tend to use it to help challenge my thinking and hopefully enhance the thinking. Because, you know, we all have limited brain capacity as well. So, you know, I think, yes, the relationship's going to be interesting, isn't it, for most of us?
absolutely. It's
Absolutely.
evolving.
But thank you very much. Just to we've come to the end of the session now as well. So if anyone has any further questions, we will be sharing that in the post-course notes, so you'll be able to reach out to Simon directly. In the chat, I've also added in some of our upcoming people sessions. So in May, we have vulnerability for people, which is all about courage and how to be real. In June, we've got role models, and we'll be, oh, I almost forgot. In May, we've also got our next in-person session, the People Power Series. That's in partnership with HR Wales. And this is a session all around well-being, and how it isn't a tick box exercise. So tickets and registration links, join in the People network group on LinkedIn. All that links is in the chat, and I will be sharing them in the email as well. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Simon, for your session, and we'll see you at the next event.
Definitely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
You.